Welcome to PCB Chat, where we talk with experts across the printed circuit design, manufacturing, and electronic supply chain fields. I'm Mike Buteau, president of the Printed Circuit Engineering Association. My guests today are Wally Rhines and Merlyn Brunken. Wally has been joining us on PCB Chat since we launched the program back in 2018. He spent more than 45 years in semiconductor and PCB design as an executive with Mentor Graphics, and before that, Texas Instruments. Joining Wally is Merlyn Brunken, who is the longtime market intelligence director with Siemens Digital formerly Mentor. Well, hello, Wally. How are you today?
Well, hi, Mike. I'm doing fine. And you?
Really good, thanks. So today we're going to discuss the fourth quarter 2022 EDA market numbers from the ESD Alliance. And these are for the period ending December 31st, 2022, and are being released the week of May 1st. As usual, our audience is most interested in the PCB and MCM design tools data. It looks like we kept the growth streak alive. It's now at 8 straight quarters, but it slowed down considerably from the third quarter.
Yes, it has. 1.7% quarter to quarter. But I would note that this is one quarter and the data is somewhat volatile. We're talking about a fourth quarter also, which sometimes is affected by different revenue recognition approaches. And if you look at the last 4 quarters moving average, PCB has been growing at basically 10% annually.
Is the Q4 typically the slowest quarter for PCB and MCM?
No, it isn't. Typically, if there is any volatility relative to quarters, then it's the end of year calendar quarter for companies that do upfront revenue recognition. So actually, it's the opposite. But a lot of things can happen with the volatility. And so it's I wouldn't necessarily tie it to the predictability or seasonality that normally occurs.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that we shouldn't read too much into this right now.
That's what I would say. It's interesting. I don't think that the previous rate was sustainable. I mean, we were up in the 15, 16% range in the past, and that would be very difficult to sustain in any sector of EDA, especially PCB. But I think the overall message has been one that printed circuit board design is a growth area for electronic design automation. And that's not something that we thought of 10 or 15 years ago. We used to think it was very, very mature and that it would move very slowly. I think a lot of things have been happening that have sped up the growth rate. And so one quarter does not a trend make. North America is quite strong in the 4-quarter moving average, almost 24%. And by far the strongest in the world.
This episode of PCB Chat is sponsored by PCB East, the East Coast Conference and Exhibition for the electronics industry. Join the industry on May 10 for a full day of free technical talks from notable experts such as Dan Beeker of NXP Semiconductor, Dave Hoover of TTM Technologies, and Ray Fugit of Downstream Technologies, talking on designing for ESD robustness, printed circuit board cost drivers, and preventing common errors caught by fabrication. Also, more than 60 leading suppliers of electronics design tools, manufacturers of bare boards and assemblies, and suppliers of fabrication and assembly equipment and materials will be present, and a free lunch will be offered on the show floor from 12 until 1 p.m. All coming May 10 to the Boxborough Regency Hotel and Conference Center in Boxborough, Massachusetts. For details, visit PCBEast.com. Wally, do the data reflect any of the sales of the smaller ECAD companies, the KeyCads, the dip traces, the easy PCs, companies like that? I mean, you may or may not be able to speak specifically to any given company that participates. And I know that they wouldn't move the needle much, but I'm curious if they participate at all.
Yeah, I've got the company listings, so let me take a look if I see any of the names you just mentioned. Or maybe Merlyn can help me on this.
Yeah, they're not. Most of those companies don't report. Even Autodesk doesn't report.
Yeah, I don't see any of those names on the list.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, Merlyn. Who was it? You said even who doesn't report? Autodesk?
Yeah. I mean,
Wow.
they have PCB. But
Yeah. So Eagle wouldn't be included in this.
no,
Wow. Okay.
So I think,
Um,
you could claim, in fact, that these data are suppressed some because they're a subset of the total, and the really small companies just don't participate.
right. Have you ever noticed any correlation between GDP growth and the new product starts?
New product starts are very difficult to measure. GDP, Merlyn measures very well, but we've made attempts in the past to correlate to what has been reported as design starts. But design starts, there's no way you can easily collect that statistical data. We don't ask for it in this report. It does show up some in the data report that Harry Foster does, but most people report the designs they complete, not the designs they start. And if you got into FPGA designs, then it would be a real liar's contest. But
but with PCB, there's a handoff between companies and foundries on the IC side or fabs, and they do. It's a little easier to track. The numbers aren't as high as they would be with PCB as well. But PCB is doesn't. I've never seen any design start data for PCB, and I don't know how you would know what a new design is versus a reorder.
Mhm.
It's not as clear, and I don't think it's as clean. There's not a natural handoff between one.
Okay,
oh,
fair enough. So let's talk about staffing. The headcount among EDAC companies rose more than 10% year over year and 2% sequentially. I mean, that's got to come to an end sometime, right?
wouldn't you think so? Merlin and I have been, and Laura have had that amaze us for years now. I can't even remember seeing a decrease in staffing. Merlin, do you remember ever seeing one?
I think many years ago, but yeah, it's almost non-existent.
So you would
Uh,
think eventually all people in the world would work in EDA, because this grows almost as fast as the revenue. And even when the revenue isn't growing, the personnel levels do. But at any rate, I think your contention is right. You can't continue to grow in double digits in the staffing, or the profit doesn't grow. It's not that scalable. In this case, you're growing the people at about the same rate as you're growing the revenue. So not a lot of fall through if you do that, since the principal cost for an EDA company is, in fact, the labor. So I think this is, while this number is almost always positive, and typically at least 5%, 10% is a big number for it, and that probably won't continue.
Well, I am going to go out on a limb and say, just based on what I've seen from the company's Q1 financials that have been reported to date, that you'll get at least one more quarter out of positive growth on the employment side. And then after that, who knows? It's a little too early to tell. But it's been nice to see, right? The companies are investing in human capital in a way that reflects, the actual revenue coming in. They're not just resting on what they have. I think they're looking for more.
Well said. I think actually this is data from the fourth quarter. Fourth quarter is when the big IT companies started announcing really major reductions in force, and that apparently didn't affect the portions of those companies that are engaged in printed circuit board design, or at least integrated circuit design. It seems to be that those activities continue to grow in terms of staffing.
we do track the open positions for each of the major companies at Siemens EDA, and we do notice that most companies have dropped dramatically in the number of open positions available, but they haven't gone. It's there's still open positions at every company.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to give short shrift to the semiconductor side. Looks like ICs did very well in the quarter.
Yeah, they did. pretty strong growth across the board. Every category was positive, and the overall license and maintenance was 13% growth. That's very good. The really strongest one was computer automated engineering. That's basically front end design, simulation, capture, and synthesis. And the next strongest was IC layout. So that layout also includes verification, and that's at 12%, which is also quite a strong number. Even intellectual property was at 9.3%, and services at 7% worldwide. So I think as you say, the growth is very broad, adds up to 11.3% overall. And the only thing you can find in the product categories that shows any weakness is in the area of what we call reporting companies for IP. For IP, we include data from public companies that report it publicly but do not report it to the ESDA. And then we also have the companies that do report to ESDA. We include their IP revenue. And so those reporting companies, the ones that are reporting all this other data, actually had a decrease of 15% in their IP sales, but it was more than offset by the public companies, and the total came out to that 9.3%.
And, obviously the E in EDA stands for electronic, but we're seeing more and more of the EDA companies having some type of offering in the MCAD space, or at least partnering with companies on that side. Again, not part of the ESD Alliance, but what happens if there is some kind of consolidation and you have the MCAD companies participating, as part of the traditional EDA space companies? Would you anticipate adding a whole separate line item for MCAD, or is there another association or another organization that tracks that data?
Yeah, that's been under consideration for a long time, but there's a pretty well-defined line between MCAD and ECAD. It's certainly true that many of the EDA companies also have MCAD products. Siemens is a classic example, but that doesn't get captured in this data. But there are others who do analysis on that. Jay Vlishar does a lot of analysis of both spaces, for example, from the financial side. But I'm not aware of any activity proposing to expand the database that we report on here. But Merlyn, do you know of any thoughts about making the electronic design market data report reflect the mechanical design market data?
There is crossover. I mean, EDA is built on, the idea of the system design. So you, for instance, get EDA companies that have cable harness tools reporting the interconnect data. And then, there's also some data management. For instance, Pedestal does track some of the big PLM companies that, it's not their whole PDM systems, but there is some crossover there as well. And Pedestal, like I said, does track some of that. So far, ESDA does not. And the equivalent kind of research companies on PLM side, there are companies that focus on that, and of course they count some of what we consider EDA in their numbers as well. So there's, like, for instance, data management in PCB and data management in cable harness, which they would assume was part of PLM, but that's on their reporting. It's how we define the subcategories really that matters.
The challenge, Mike, is to get a set of people who view the service as valuable and will report the data and depend upon the data. And we have that for the overall EDA industry. Essentially, everyone who's a participant sees value in the data and therefore tends to participate. You haven't had that enlistment in mechanical CAD. And really, even though it's been predicted for many years that the two would merge more and more together, they've stayed pretty distinct. As Merlyn mentions, the electronic design automation companies report the wire harness data, but it's for the tools you use to design the wiring. The mechanical CAD tools that design the frame of the vehicle are a different set of tools and don't show up in the numbers.
Got it. Well, I appreciate you walking me through that. It's one of those things I've thought about and I always forget to ask you about.
A couple other things in the data that are probably noteworthy, especially to your audience. One is that in all the numbers, there were some negatives. There was library data management was a negative 18%, and IC package design, surprisingly, was a negative 14%. The IC package design is a smaller category, about $46 million, even much less in the quarter. That's the year.
Yeah. The package design is a category where I think the analysis tools are reported separately. Package design is heavy on analysis, of course, thermal and all of that.
Yeah, good point.
And I think most companies don't report those tools inside of package design. They report them in PCB analysis.
There was positive growth on the analysis side and on the schematic capture part of design, but it was small. You can't point to one thing in the PCB except there's this other category of PCB roll-up that did grow somewhat and is not a small number, so that affects it. But people put in all sorts of things. We have no control over how people decide to define their revenue by product category.
Yeah, that's good to know. I don't get that level of detail in the press briefing.
Yeah, we don't provide that. So the report we send out that you get to see in anticipation of talking to your clients is an abbreviated form. However, for a small fee, you can in fact get the full report with all of the line item details. So I'm sure that the people at ESDA would be more than happy to fix you up with a subscription.
Well, thanks as always, Wally, for sharing the news, and I look forward to catching up with you next quarter. And thank you, Merlyn.
Sure.
Okay, Mike, glad to do it.
This is Mike Buteau. Have a good day.